Okay, colleagues and friends, good evening and welcome to this event. We are still admitting people to the event, so numbers will begin to creep up, but given that it's good to start in a timely way, I'm going to open the meeting at this stage. My name is Christine Blower. I am a Labour peer nominated to the House of Lords by Jeremy Corbyn. And I'm very pleased to be the chair and the moderator for this event this evening. Just by way of background, I've been involved in political campaigning in Turkey and Kurdistan for many years as a patron of peace in Kurdistan, also involved with SPOT, Support for the People of Turkey, and the Freedom for Öcalan campaign, as well as being a vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group for Kurdistan in Syria and Turkey in the British Parliament. The event this evening focuses on the vital question of campaigning against violence against women. We have a brilliant panel of women who will give us the benefit of their experience and their expertise, and I will introduce them as they speak. But just first, a few words from me by way of background to the meeting. We all know that violence against women is a global phenomenon. Women suffer violence, domestic abuse, rape and coercive control here in the UK, as pretty well worldwide. But in Turkey, there are some particular dimensions that make this issue much worse and therefore in need of much greater campaigning. From the proposed legislation to allow rapists to walk free if they agree to marry their victim, and incidentally, who says there will only ever be one victim? And the current government, Erdogan's government, has indicated that it will withdraw from the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention regarding violence against women. And of course, women who speak out as activists and trade unionists risk being sacked, jailed, physically attacked, and all of the things of which we are well aware, but about which we will hear much more from our speakers this evening. So with those brief opening remarks, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Selma Atabey. She is the co-president of the Health and Social Services Union in Turkey, which is affiliated to KESK, the Confederation of Public Employees Unions. This union represents upwards of 25,000 public health officers. Its big areas of struggle are for social, economic, and professional rights, as well, of course, as for peace and democracy in Turkey. Selma will no doubt mention this, but she was permanently dismissed from the public service during the state of emergency, as were so many of our colleagues and friends in the trade union movement. She, before being the co-president, she was a member of the executive of her union, SES, and the women's secretary. So she is ideally placed to talk to us about the situation for both activists, for trade unionists, and for women in Turkey. Selma may very well leave us at the end of her intervention. So if you have a question that you would like to put particularly to Selma, you can put it in the chat box and I will be monitoring that. Selma will speak to us in Turkish and will be sequentially translated by Osman. So we're delighted to have you here, Selma. The floor is yours.
Tamam. Öncelikle herkese merhaba demek istiyorum. Yani böylesi bir akşamda sizlerle birlikte olmak, kadın dayanışmasını ve kadın gücünü bu şekilde hissetmek benim açımdan çok güzel, çok iyi. Çünkü yaklaşık 10 gündür Covid hastasıyım maalesef. Ve bundan kaynaklı da kendimi çok güçlü hissedemedim hani bu sunumu yapma noktasında, ama kabul ettiğim için de bu akşam için bunu iptal etmeyi de istemedim. O yüzden bir kusurum olursa şimdiden af diliyorum işin açıkçası.
So, hello everyone. I am very pleased to be with you tonight. It is a great initiative to see this women solidarity and women power here, because I have been suffering from COVID-19 for 10 days already, and I feel a little bit depressed and also weak. But despite this COVID-19 issue, I didn't want to cancel this event, and I'm very empowered even by seeing you here. So if there is any mistake just because I don't feel good, please excuse me in advance.
Öncelikle Kristin'in giriş konuşmasından başlamak istiyorum. Evet, AKP maalesef, yani Türkiye'de AKP 20 yıllık bir hükümet sürecini yürütüyor ve bundan kaynaklı da kadın kazanımlarına dönük çok ciddi ideolojik tartışmalar yürüterek çok ciddi saldırılarla karşı karşıya kalıyoruz. Yaklaşık 20 yıldır Türkiye'de, daha doğrusu 40 yıllık bir kadın mücadelesi mevcut. Bunun yanı sıra Kürdistan'dan da bir kadın özgürlük mücadelesi yürütülmeye çalışılıyor. Fakat AKP hükümetinin 20 yıllık iktidarı boyunca da ortaya koyduğu pratik kadın düşmanı politikalarla yürüttüğü bir süreç var. Ve özellikle 2016'da sizler de zaten Türkiye'deki siyasi gelişmeleri takip ediyorsunuzdur. 2016'da bir darbe söz konusu oldu ve bu darbeden sonra ilan edilen o harp süreci ve arkasından çıkartılan keykelerle aslında çok büyük insan haklarına dönük çok büyük saldırılara maruz kaldık ve bu konuda da en çok kadınlar işin doğrusu bu işin mağduru oldu ve son 4 yıldır kadınlar hala sokaklarda bu noktada mücadele veriyor ve bu mücadeleyi de en üst perdeden sokaklarda, alanlarda sesini yükseltmeye çalışıyor ve uluslararası boyutta da bu tartışmaları hala yürütmeye devam ediyor. Son 4 yıldır, ondan öncesi de var ama son 4 yıldır özellikle bu noktada kadın kazanımlarına dönük İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni Kristin de ifade etti. 2011 yılında Türkiye'nin yine AKP'nin aslında imza attığı, fakat son 9 yılda geriye dönük dinci, gerici politikalarla bunu geriletmeye dönük çok üstün bir çabası var. Ve bu noktada da bizler itirazlarımızı gerçekleştiriyoruz. Osman, yeterli mi? Yani nasıl ara vereyim? Sen onu da bana söyle, ben ona göre şey yapayım.
Bir uzarsa ben söyleyeyim size hocam. Şimdilik iyi ama. In her introductory remarks, opening remarks, Kristin referred to the women's situation here in Turkey, and I fully agree with her. It is a fact that AKP has been ruling this country for almost 20 years. And in this period, since the very beginning, there have been certain attacks on women's rights, particularly from its ideological position. There are certain discourses to eliminate women's achievements that we have made throughout our struggle for more than 40 years. And there is also women's rights movement in Kurdistan, which also has suffered a lot in this period because of this repressive policies and practices. I'm sure you are following the political developments here in Turkey. For example, following the coup attempt in 2016, the government declared state of emergency, then introduced emergency decree laws, which led to grave human rights violations. And as a result of these practices, women were not exceptional, and women also suffered a lot in all these practices. But despite all these repressive policies and practices, women are still in the streets. We are still taking the streets, and we say no to all these type of practices that target our achievements that we have made. Of course, as a result of our struggle within the country, there are certain reflections at the international level too, which is important. Although we are talking about this 4 years deterioration, it has a longer history. I mean, this deterioration, because the government has been ruling this country for a long period. And as Christine referred to the Istanbul Convention, which the government of Turkey signed back in 2011 and as the first signatory state in this respect. But even though it has signed this convention, it has been practicing policies, it has been enforcing policies which are based on religion and conservatism. This is why there has been a certain and continuous attack on women's achievements that we have gained throughout the history of our struggle.
Tamam. Türkiye'de zaten var olan ataerkil sistemin bir devamı olan AKP hükümeti toplumsal cinsiyet eşitsizliğini daha da derinleştirmiş durumda. Özellikle eğitimle başlayan kız çocuklarına dönük yaklaşımlar, erken yaşta çocuk evliliğinin gerçekleştirilmesi meselesini destekleyen, her kadına 3 çocuk, en az 3 çocuk tavsiyesi veren ve bu noktada da kürtaja ulaşımı engelleyen bir noktada çalışmalarını yürütmeye devam ediyor. Aslında Türkiye'de eşit işe eşit ücret talebiyle bizler mücadele verirken maalesef kadınların istihdam alanının olmayışı veya istihdam edilen alanlarda güvencesiz alanlarda çalıştırılması meselesi bizim açımızdan çok önemli. Bunun yanı sıra cinsiyetçi iş bölümünün bütün iş kollarında, bütün çalışma biçimlerinde karşımıza çıkıyor ve buna dönük de mücadelelerimiz devam ediyor. Güvencesiz işler, özellikle bu Covid-19 pandemisiyle birlikte Türkiye'de maalesef derinleşen, sizlerin de bildiği, aslında sadece Türkiye'de değil, tüm dünyadaki ülkelerde derinleşen kadına yönelik şiddetin bir başka örneğini bizler de Türkiye'de maalesef maruz kaldık. Özellikle bu son 7 ayda sokağa çıkma yasaklarıyla birlikte Covid-19'dan kaynaklı kamusal alanların, birçok alanın kadınlara kapatılması üzerinden, sığınma evlerinin kapatılması ve kadınların işte karakollara veya güvenlik güçlerine sığındığı noktada istedikleri hizmeti alamaması noktasına şiddetin çok daha derin yaşandığını hepimiz biliyoruz. Ama bunun istatistiği konusunda maalesef bir çalışma yürütemiyoruz. Çünkü Türkiye'de yoksul ve işsiz olan kesimler çok fazla ve pandemiden kaynaklı biz o kadınlara ulaşıp onların yaşadığı sorunların net bir şekilde tespitini yapamıyoruz. Alınmayan tedbirler, işte İstanbul Sözleşmesi üzerinden yürüttüğümüz son 4 aydır bir tartışma yürüyor. Çünkü İstanbul Sözleşmesi Türkiye'li kadınlar için gerçekten önemli bir sözleşme. Bu sözleşme en azından şiddete maruz kalmış, tacize, tecavüze maruz kalmış kadınları koruyan, engelleyen bir sözleşme ve bir yasa olmasına rağmen AKP hükümeti Haziran ayındandır yaptığı kampanya ile birlikte bu sözleşmeyi tamamıyla ortadan kaldırıp kadınların sesini veya taleplerini kısmaya dönük girişimlerine hala devam ediyor. Özellikle cinsel tacize, tecavüze veya şiddete maruz kalmış kadınların yargının taraflı olmasından kaynaklı, yine erkek yargı sisteminin olmasından kaynaklı bu eylemleri yapan erkeklere dönük bir cezasızlık politikasıyla hala çalışmalarını devam ettirmekte ve bizler de buna dönük mücadelelerimizi yürütmekle çaba sarf ediyoruz.
As I said, the attacks on women's rights have a longer history because there has been a well-established patriarchal mentality in this country, and AKP, the Justice and Development, which is the ruling party, AKP is just a continuation of these policies and practices. And it has been following policies which has deepened and deteriorated gender inequality in this country. It aims to redesign the society through education, which allows women and girls for underage marriage, or also this more religious generations. And AKP, for example, aims to, or has a discourse which says every woman must have at least 3 children, which is the reflection of its mentality with regard to the gender equality. With regard to the trade union perspective, what we see that there is no job equality and job security for women. If you are a woman, then you face certain problems when you apply for a job, and it begins from the recruitment process. Even if you are recruited, then you face problems with regard to the wage, with regard to the promotion and other social and economic rights in the country. Of course, this COVID-19 has made the problems that women are facing more visible. And it is a fact that these problems are a global issue. So it is not something special or specific to Turkey that we are facing here. However, what we have seen here, this COVID-19 deteriorated the situation with regard to domestic violence, and there is no public space for women any longer, which is also a problem because it has shrunk in this period, COVID-19. And there is no, for example, efficient shelters for women, those who are subjected to domestic violence. Plus, it should be noted that there is no or effective legal protection for women when they face domestic violence. When they go to court or police station, they immediately experience the reflections of patriarchal mentality that includes judiciary members who protect the male perpetrators, which is a problem from our side. And in this period, we know that the situation is really problematic, but there is no access to data. There is no well-documented data and figures regarding the women. What we can say is the tip of the iceberg only. What we are collecting some data, and it is just the tip of the iceberg in this respect, because women are suffering from poverty and unemployment, which makes us difficult, or which puts barrier to access to this woman. And as you might have followed, the government, the ruling party, has launched a campaign against the Istanbul Convention in early summer. And we, as the women's movement here, stood against this campaign. And we worked on this for more than 4 months. And we finally managed that the ruling party withdrew its campaign as a result of our situation. Of course, the Istanbul Convention is not a convention only. It's a very efficient and useful instrument if it is implemented well. It's a very useful instrument for women who face violence, harassment, and abuse. It is important. And what we know is that, unfortunately, the campaign against the Istanbul Convention is not an isolated action. It is just a reflection of its overall mentality.
Özellikle
Buyurun.
Türkiye'de evet HDP partisiyle birlikte aslında siyaseten kadınların çok güçlü olduğu alanlar oluşturuldu. İşte eş başkanlık sistemiyle belediyelerde var olan işte kadın erkek eşitliğiyle oluşturulan temsiliyetler kadınlara, Türkiye'li kadınlara inanılmaz bir güç kattı. Hem bunun yanı sıra parlamentoda yine HDP'nin eşit temsiliyet üzerinden yürüttüğü seçimlerle birlikte parlamentoda birçok kadın siyasetçi olarak yerini aldı. Ama maalesef yine AKP hükümetiyle birlikte kadın düşmanı politikalarından kaynaklı özellikle Kürdistan'daki belediyelere çok ciddi saldırılar, kayyumlar atayarak kadın eş başkanları gözaltına almalar, tutuklamalar ve işkencelere maruz kaldılar. Bunu da bu şekilde buradan ifade etmek doğru olur diye düşünüyorum. Çünkü biliyorsunuz ki Türkiye'de özellikle Kürdistan illerinde yıllardır, yaklaşık 40 yıldır görünen veya görünmeyen bir savaş politikası mevcut ve bundan kaynaklı da Kürdistan'da Kürt Özgürlük Hareketi'ni, Kadın Kürt Özgürlük Hareketi'nin yarattığı çok ciddi bir etkileşim var. Yani bunu Kobani ile de aslında değerlendirebiliriz ve Türkiye'deki maalesef politikalar, özellikle Kürt kadın hareketine dönük politikalar çok daha korkunç düzeyde. Gözaltılar, tutuklamalar, işte köpeklerle işkenceler, kadınlara yapılan işkenceler veya kadın özgürlük mücadelesinde atılan her adımda kadınlara dönük bu noktada çok ciddi saldırılarla meşrulaştırılmaya çalışılıyor. Bunun yanı sıra taciz ve tecavüz Türkiye'nin bütün illerinde mevcut. Ama Kürdistan'da yine bu polis eliyle, var olan güvenlik güçlerin elleriyle özel bir savaş politikasıyla yürütülmeye çalışılıyor. Belki hani buradan doğru örneklendirmeye çalışırsak Batman'da 15 yaşındaki bir kız çocuğuna güvenlik güçlerinden birinin 20 gün bir eve hapsederek tecavüzde bulunarak ve sonrasında da devlet eliyle yine bu kişi tutuklanmadan yargılanma süreci başlatıldı. Şırnak'ta yine benzeri bir durum yaşandı. Özellikle Dersim'de de, yani bunu da örneklendirmek istiyorum. Gülistan Doku adında bir üniversite öğrencisinin yaklaşık 300 gündür maalesef siyasi güçlerle ilintili olan bir isimden kaynaklı Kürdistan'da Kürt kadınlarına dönük bu saldırılar, tacizler, tecavüzler veya işkenceler maalesef yargıda ne karşılığını buluyor ne de bununla ilgili Türkiye'de tartışılmasına dahi izin verilmiyor. Çünkü sosyal medyalarda veya basında bunu paylaşan gazetecilere dönük bile çok ciddi saldırılar ve gözaltılar, hatta tutuklanmaya varan durumlarla karşı karşıya kalınıyor. Açayım mı biraz daha Osman?
Ben burayı yapayım hocam, bir saniye.
Tamam.
Of course, the women's struggle made certain achievements, and together with the HDP's political activities, we gained more space in the public life and also in the political life. Since the HDP introduced this co-presidency system to the municipalities, women gained more representation in the political life and also in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. It is very important in this respect because this co-presidency system provided space for women, but it is responded by this appointment of trustees to the municipalities, which also aim to target women's achievements in this respect. And there is also this hostility approach to any type of women's activities in Kurdistan, because as you know, there has been a war for 40 years in Kurdistan. And all these, throughout this period, women have been very active, and there has been a quite dynamic interaction with different women's groups and also with individuals. As you may remember, during the period of this invasion of, or the siege of Kobani, women were active at that time as well. And all this active and dynamic and vibrant women's struggle is responded by the arrest, detention, torture, rape, judicial harassment of women through the security officers or non-state actors. Irrespective of their profile, the key issue is there has been a special policy within the scope of this war or warfare, however you call it, in Kurdistan. Let me give you a few examples with regard to these practices targeting women in Kurdistan. For example, a 15-year-old girl was raped by a security officer, a low-ranked soldier, for more than 20 days. And this guy was not even sent to prison. I mean, he was sent to prison for a few days and then he was released. So there is another case in Dersim, the case of enforced disappearances of a university student, Gülistan Doku. The family has been trying to find her whereabouts for more than 300 days. So this type of practices is quite problematic, and the issue is there is no effective remedy or there is no effective legal protection when you go and apply to the judicial bodies and judicial courts here.
Bizim sendikadaki aktivistlerimiz ve biz sendikacı kadınlar olarak maalesef bu çatışmadan ya da bu kadına yönelik şiddetten çok azade değiliz. Özellikle son 4 yıldır ülkemizde yaşanılan otoriter sistemden kaynaklı diğer alanlar gibi biz sendikacı kadınlar da bu süreçte hem sendikacılığı hem kadın özgürlük mücadelesini yürütme noktasında çok ciddi politikalarla karşı karşıya kalıyoruz. Özellikle mesela şu anda bizim SES'ten 3 kadın arkadaş tutuklu ve sendikal çalışma yürüttükleri için bu kadın arkadaşlar tutuklandılar. Bunun yanı sıra yüzlerce kadın arkadaş yaptığı eylemlerden kaynaklı kadın mücadelesine destek verdikleri için ya da kendi haklarını aradıkları için gözaltına alındılar. Ansızın her sabah işte 5'te yapılan operasyonlarla bu kadınlar hem korkutulmaya hem ürkütülmeye çalışılıyor, hem de toplum içerisinde rencide edilmeye çalışılıyor. Bu şekilde ifşa, afişe edilmeye çalışılıyor. Buna dönük biz ses olarak zaten hem eş başkanlık sisteminin olması hem kadın sekreterliğinin kurumsallaşması, bunun yanı sıra bütün yönetim kademelerinde eşit temsiliyeti esas aldığımız noktada kadın mücadelesini kendimizi her alanda var etme çabası içerisindeyiz. Özellikle iş yerinden başlayarak şubelerimizde ve genel merkez düzeyinde kurduğumuz kadın meclisleriyle bu görevi ve bu mücadeleyi en iyi şekilde icra etmeye çalışıyoruz. Ama maalesef az önce de bahsettiğim fikir ve düşünce ifadesi konusunda Türkiye o otoriter yapısından kaynaklı çok ciddi sorunlara neden oluyor ve kadınlar doğal olarak var olan ataerkil toplumsal yapıdan kaynaklı ve aile baskısından kaynaklı sendikal mücadeleyi yürütemeyecek noktaya getirilmiş durumda. Devam edeyim mi Osman?
Şimdi tercümeyi Canan arkadaşımız devraldı. Eğer o notlarını aldı, o tercüme edecek. Eğer edemezse ben hemen hızlıca tabii ki tercümeyi yaparım. Canan, buralarda mısın? Koptun mu acaba? Okay. Tamam. So, my colleague was taking notes. It was her turn, but
Hello. Tamam. Şimdi
buyur canım,
konuşabilirim. Sorry for the delay because I couldn't unmute myself. I have taken the notes. Okay. Hello again. First of all, I would like to say that as the activists in the trade unions and trade unionist women, of course, we are not all free of this environment, of this atmosphere I have mentioned, and of the conflicts we have been face to face, all these conflicts and pressures we have been exposed as women, and especially for the last 4 years, because of this authoritarian system, we are both harassed, and we are both having challenges about both struggling for women freedom and also for the trade union activism. For example, 3 women from our trade union, the Hot Workers Association, says are arrested because they of the investigations again opened against them because of the trade union work they had done, and thousands of women have been also taken into custody because of the activists, because of the actions and of women or participating to the march of women or supporting them, and they are already, they have been always harassed or being exposed to the society as something like they have been under a stigmatization, like they with the operations take the raids made into their homes at 5 o'clock early in the morning, and they are trying to make them to be harassed by all the, and to make them frightened, to make them fear with these operations and raids they have made. And also, but we as women in the trade unions as try to continue our struggle with establishing the equal representative system, equal representation system, the co-chair system, and also as institutionalizing the women secretaries bureaus in all the trade unions, starting from the workplace, to make women exist everywhere in the trade union movement. For example, we are trying to also establish women assemblies everywhere, starting from the workplaces to the trade union headquarters, from the top to the bottom and bottom to the down, up and down. And also, we also have been experiencing some difficulties for some women, because sometimes they give up sometimes the trade union movement because of this patriarchal authoritarian system, and also the pressure of their families, and because of the investigations and these operations of and policies of AKP, because of they are expressing their thoughts and opinions And so we are also having another difficulty to make them continue the trade union movement too.
Özellikle aktivistlerimize dönük yaklaşık 4 yıldır 800 üyemiz ihraç oldu. Bu üyelerimizin 232 tanesi kadın aktivistlerimiz, kadın yöneticilerimiz ve özellikle onlar hedef alındı. Bunun yanı sıra az önce de bahsettim, birçok arkadaşımız gözaltına alındı, tutuklandı. Bunun yanı sıra da kurum içerisinde çok ciddi bir baskı ve mobbingle karşı karşıyalar. Herhangi bir bildiri veya broşür veya bir afiş asmak istediklerinde idarecilerin çok ciddi itirazlarıyla karşı karşıya kalıyorlar ve bundan kaynaklı da kurum içerisinde veya il dışına sürgünlerle bu süreçte sürgünlerle karşı karşıya kaldık. Bunun yanı sıra her ne kadar OHAL ve KK süreci bitti dediysek de bakanlık düzeyinde kurulmuş olan komisyonlarda yine bu kadın veya işte karmadaki erkek arkadaşlarla birlikte ihraç süreci maalesef devam ettiriliyor, bu politika devam ettiriliyor ve bundan kaynaklı da sendikal çalışmalarımızın önünde çok ciddi engellerle karşı karşıya kalmaktayız maalesef. Ve bunu aşma noktasında da yine şubelerimizde, üyelerimizle, temsilcilerimizle dönem dönem yaptığımız toplantılarda bu sorunları yine direnişle, birlikte ve dayanışma ile örebileceğimize inanıp bu çalışmaları hala Türkiye'de her ne kadar üye sayımız 42 binlerden, bu otoriter yapıdan kaynaklı 20 binlere inmişse dahi sokakları, alanları, kadın mücadelesi noktasında ve diğer sendikal hak ve özgürlükler noktasında, emek, barış, demokrasi noktasında doldurmaya devam ediyoruz.
And of course, especially as I mentioned before, for the last 4 years, we have been exposed to different challenges like the dismissals. 800 members of us have been dismissed with the state of emergency decrees, as I had said, and 232 of these members of us were women and women executives of our trade unions. And because we think that they are especially selected as a target for these dismissals, and also they're always under the threat of being taken into custody or being arrested, and they are also always being exposed to the pressure and mobbing of their managers at the workplace, even if they want to hang a poster or they want to distribute flyer, something else, or leaflet. They have been, the managers are objecting to these actions, and most of the time they are under the threat of being sent to exile or to a different province or to a different institution within the institution. And also the dismissals is continuing actually, but though they said that the state of emergency period is over or the state of the emergency decrees are over, the commissions formed under the institutions or in the state are still continuing these dismissal processes. So it still makes us going under difficulties for continuing our struggle. And as the activists in the trade union movements, we are also having these barriers in the trade union movements, of course. But with the meetings we have been doing with our representatives or our members, we always say that we are going to struggle and we are going to resist and we are going to overcome all these difficulties with the resistance and solidarity we have. And also, even if the number of our members were around 42,000 before this period, and now it is lowered on up to 20,000, but we are still trying to continue our struggle of and our support to women movement, to peace and democracy movement, and also for our actions for the labor.
Yani bu noktada Türkiye'de güçlü bir kadın mücadelesi yürüyor. Özellikle bu 25 Kasım'da zaten birçok engellemelerle karşı karşıya kaldık. Birçok ilde eylem koyduk kadın platformlarıyla birlikte. Çünkü sadece ses veya kes kadınları olarak değil, illerde oluşturulan kadın platformlarıyla önümüze birçok eylem, etkinlik koyduk ve 25 Kasım'da da bunu gerçekleştirmeye çalıştık. Birçok ilimizde bunu gerçekleştirebildik ama dediğim gibi AKP'nin muhafazakar yapısı ve kadına yaklaşımlarından kaynaklı birçok ilde yasaklamalarla karşı karşıya kaldık. Ve bunun yanı sıra da yine yapılan eylem ve etkinliklere yapılan saldırılar sonucunda da yine gözaltılar mevcuttu. Ama şunu çok iyi biliyoruz ki biz kadınlar güçlü olduğumuz sürece, o dayanışmayı sağladığımız sürece ve uluslararası normlarda da yine kadın platformları oluşturduğumuz sürece bu sürecin üstesinden geldiğimiz gibi kadını istediği, olması gereken konuma, yani eşit ve özgür yapıya kavuşturacağımıza inanıyorum deyip ben bu şekilde bir noktayı koyayım Canan.
Teşekkür ederim. Let me finish like that. Yes, we have a strong women movement in Turkey. You can see it even in the last actions and march organized on the 25th of November. We are organizing all these actions with women platforms established within in many provinces. So we are not organizing these actions only as the trade unions, but with other women organizations, with women platforms. We have organized and we have participated to many actions throughout the day of 25th of November. But as I said, the conservatory, because of the conservative policies of AKP and their policies against women, some of these actions in the provinces has been banned, and some of them were stopped by the police and intervened by the police, and some of our friends were also taken into custody because of these police attacks. But we know that we will achieve the freedom of women and the real free position of women with the solidarity of each other, with struggle, and also the women platforms established in international arena too. So I am sure that we will win, and thank you so much for listening me.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Selma. We're delighted to have heard from you. There was just one question to you in the chat, which I will just ask you perhaps to answer briefly, which is about the Istanbul Convention. You said it can be a very useful tool, the Istanbul Convention. And the question is, what is the situation about Turkey withdrawing from that convention? Could that still happen?
Sorry, I was
Selma
reading.
Hocam,
Can you repeat that?
soru şu. Canancığım, ben gördüm notu, hemen söyleyeyim. İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden geri çekilme süreci hükümet tarafından ya da iktidar partisi tarafından rafa kaldırıldı mı? Böylesi bir durum tekrardan yaşanabilir mi?
Yani işin doğrusu rafa kaldırılmak için Haziran ayından beridir AKP hükümeti ve yandaşları çok ciddi bir çaba sarf ettiler. Ama kadın direnişi, kadın eylemleri ve kadının sokağa yaklaşık 2 ay boyunca yaptığı eylem ve etkinliklerden dolayı bu yüzden geri çekildi. Ama bunun yarın tekrar gündeme gelmeyeceği anlamına gelmiyor ve biz buna dönük yine kadın platformları, kadın örgütleriyle birlikte bu tartışmaları hala yürütüyoruz ve yürütmeye devam edeceğiz. Çünkü AKP İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni, yani bizim kadın mücadelesiyle kazandığımız İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni elimizden almaya kararlı. Her şeyden önce kendi muhafazakar ve ideolojik yapısından kaynaklı buna kararlı. Bizler de İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni rafa kaldırılmaması için ve hatta genişletilmesi için, bütün maddelerinin uygulanması için mücadeleye devam edeceğiz.
Actually, they have withdrawn. They withdrew the legislation, the draft for taking the convention, for exiting from the convention in June. But because of the resistance of women and the widespread actions throughout the country, they have stopped it in talking about it in the National Assembly. But it doesn't mean that they will not gonna talk about it again, because we know that AKP is AKP will do that. They are they have taken this decision because both because of their ideological approach and their conservative ideological approach, and they want to exit from the convention. And they are very decisive about that. But we are also know that we also know that we are ready for resisting for this convention. We are still continuing our actions and meetings and discussions about the convention, and also we are trying to create a pressure both to make it wider and also both to make it applied with all the articles it has included.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. And thank you once again, Selma, for joining us, particularly when you're actually unwell. So it's very good of you to give up your time to talk to us. We here in the trade union movement, in particular women in the trade union movement, feel very strongly about supporting our sisters. And so we offer you all of our solidarity. Thank you.
Selma, çok teşekkür ederim bize katıldığın için. Sizlere tüm kadın sendikacıların dayanışmasını tekrar ifade etmek isteriz diyor.
Biz de çok teşekkür ediyoruz bu fırsatı bize verdikleri için. Tekrar kusura bakmasınlar, toparlayamamış olabilirim, dağınık anlatabilmiş, yani dağınık anlatmış olabilirim. Evet. Umuyorum ki
yok, özellikle iyi olmadığınız. Pardon, özellikle iyi olmadığınız halde katıldığınız için teşekkür ederim de dedi.
Tamam. Ben de çok teşekkür ediyorum. İyi akşamlar diliyorum.
Okay, thank you so much sorry because I was not so well. I couldn't wrap it up maybe, but thank you so much again for giving me this opportunity. Good evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Selma. We wish you good health going forward. And so, colleagues and friends, we now move to our next speaker. And I completely forgot to say at the beginning of the meeting that the meeting is also being streamed on Facebook, and it is being recorded. But everyone's probably so used to Zoom that they will have noticed that it was being recorded. Anyway, our next speaker is Pat Heron, sister trade unionist, member of Unison's NEC and chair of the Northern Region Women's Network. She's also chair of the Northern TUC's Women's Group. Her voice is definitely a strong one, ensuring that women are heard and represented in the trade union movement. And she is going to give us the benefit of her life experience and her campaigning work. So, Pat, we're delighted you're with us. The floor is yours. Unmute. You need to unmute.
That's it. I've got you. Thank you. Perfect. Sorry. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for including me and allowing me to speak on this platform. It's the first time ever that I've spoken anywhere outside of England around these issues. And can I just say that I don't know exactly how we would relay some of the issues from the UK trade unions to you over here with the environment that you are having to endure in Turkey. Because fortunately for us, as at this moment in time, being a trade unionist, an activist, wouldn't lead, hopefully, to us being imprisoned, raped and abused in the ways that is happening to you over in Turkey. My journey started when I was 23 years of age. It started approximately about 3 years before that. I became a victim of domestic abuse and had to fight at 23 years of age. The patriarchal, institutionalized British Army and Catholic Church, which for me then was horrendous. Domestic abuse was never talked about. It was a hidden subject. There was no support in the services that I'm pleased to say in the UK we have now. And it was through my union, Unison, that helped me to become educated more and gave me a platform to talk about domestic abuse and gave me the safety of that environment to be able to move ahead and become where I am nowadays. I have to say that in the UK at the moment, we are seeing our latest statistics telling us that only 99% of rape and sexual abuse cases are not reaching the courts. We have seen a slowdown in women's rights since the Tory government have come in, and hopefully we're not speeding backwards like I'm hearing from you here today. I've just had a webinar where Jess Phillips was speaking for us, and Jess Phillips has been a great advocate and has taken 2 amendments for Unison to go in the new domestic abuse bill that is currently within our Parliament. And I asked Jess one question, and that question was, what would the lives of the women here in the UK, which would enable us not only to fight for the women in the UK, but for the women in the rest of the globe, if we had managed to get the CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, ratified. It's been ratified, but as yet, not one political party in the UK has decided to enshrine that in our UK domestic law. And that would have been a major step for us in the UK, because it not only would have entailed the domestic abuse, it would have gone childcare, equality, women's equal pay, and so many more things in the equality arena for us. Unison has 1.3 million members. 70% of those are women, which makes us the largest female movement in the UK and the largest trade union. I'm very proud to be in a union that has got the women's agenda at the very heart of it. But for us, we've worked very hard in adding on the bit of domestic abuse in the workplace. And we are currently working towards that. In the Northern region, I very closely over the years have been working with our women's services. These women's services are predominantly at this moment in time charities and community and voluntary, and they sometimes have to go and ask for the pot of money through the charities, some through the local governments. But in the cuts that we've seen recently, we have seen the closure of lots of specialised women's services, and we've also seen some refuge spaces not being provided as they should have been for the women in our own country. So what have we been doing about it? Well, because of all the factors that I've just been mentioning, and because Unison members have been telling us repeatedly over the years that domestic abuse is that workplace matter. As I said, we've been working with Jess Phillips on getting our amendment to the domestic abuse bill and the safeguarding of Unison amendments to that domestic abuse bill. And this will help us ensure that the victims can remain in their jobs. We know work can be a lifeline to independence and survival for women. Our first goal is to secure a legal right to paid leave time off, to access legal or financial advice, to arrange childcare or alternative accommodation, and to seek medical advice. Helps the victims begin to put their lives back together with their employment being secure. Our second goal is to achieve conditions on domestic abuse perpetrators to ensure that victims are safe in the workplace. And finally, we want to see training and the advice for employers about dealing with domestic abuse and its impact within the workplace. And it's not just about the managers or the colleagues and the workers should be aware of the signs and impacts of the domestic abuse. It's also the case that the public services are often the first place to pick up the signs of abuse in children or adult service users. Unison's members who work in the schools, hospitals and universities need the training about how to recognise domestic abuse and how to report and deal with the abuse as well as possible perpetrators. And of course, during COVID, like everywhere and the lockdown, we saw an exceptional rise in domestic abuse. And one of the things that I wanted to say on here now is, it's been called a shadow pandemic, but it's always been there, and it isn't a shadow. It's what reality is to the women and girls within our own UK and within the global arena. And I want to say that from my point of view, what I was saying to the women over here is, we must not allow the word shadow to be used around domestic abuse. That this time it has brought it out into the light, and we want to join in solidarity with other women's organisations across the globe and with yourselves here in Turkey to ensure that the very solidarity and the work that we are all doing as women together on the women's agenda and on the platforms that we have is that domestic abuse doesn't remain in the shadow. It is in the light, and it will be out there to be discussed at every avenue and way that we can. What things have taught me when I've looked in history is that we are still here in the 21st century living in a world that has been dominated by predominantly white men, and they have been having conversations about women from every aspect of our lives, making the decisions around us, without us, and not including us. And what I want to say is this: if we have every right to be at their meetings, we have every right to have our women's voices heard. And my thing now is to us that if they're not going to allow us on their platforms and in their arenas, then we just invite ourselves and we take our own chairs. I hope this has been helpful to you all. An absolute solidarity from Unison at all its levels. And we will be working together to look at joining up and doing links with our branches, with yous in your trade union movements over here. Thank you very much yet again for allowing me on your platform.
Thank you very much, Pat. A very inspiring and vigorous presentation there, and absolutely right. Solidarity in sisterhood is so important, and as many people always say, and we can say in the women's movement, when men seek to dominate, nothing about us without us. We're always going to be there. So thank you very much, Pat. And we know that solidarity is provided globally in many places, and Stephen is on the call, and I know that he does a lot of work with our friends and colleagues in Turkey and Kurdistan too. So our next speaker is Mary Davis. Mary is a visiting professor of Labour history at Royal Holloway College and the University of London. She's certainly very well known to me and many others as a writer, as a lecturer, as a broadcaster on women's history, on Labour history, on anti-imperialism and racism. Mary and I have a number of things in common, but two of them are that we both have the gold badge from the TUC, and we're both patrons of peace in Kurdistan. So there you are. Mary does many more things, but one that I really like is that she's the chair of the Charter for Women. So she's got an immense amount to contribute, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, Mary. The floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Christine. Our gold badge women have got to stick together. Violence against women is a particular problem in Turkey and Kurdistan, but it is a worldwide problem. And in preparing for this, I came across some very surprising facts and figures from the United Nations and the World Health Organization, which I'm going to share with you. But I'm very aware that what Selma said, whatever figures and facts that I'm going to give you, to quote Selma, this is the tip of the iceberg. We really don't know everything, and we probably never will, because women are hidden from history, hidden from society, and we have to uncover all of this ourselves. So from these amazing organizations that have begun to collect some facts, thank goodness, that's the United Nations World Health Organization, we know that 1 in 5 women suffer rape or attempted rape in their lifetimes. Actually, that is quite shocking. 1 in 5 women. globally, 35% of women have experienced physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or sexual violence by a non-partner. And this figure doesn't include sexual harassment. Some national studies show that the number can be as high as 70% of women. And it has been mentioned about in COVID, but calls for helplines have increased fivefold in some countries as rates of reported intimate partner violence have increased during the COVID pandemic. And I can't believe this, but I'm sure it is accurate, but because I don't think the United Nations will give a figure like this, but 137 women are killed by a member of their family every day. You know, at one point, they used to call this honor killings. What a vile euphemism that was for murder, femicide. That's what we're talking about, the murder of women. Now, okay, they report that 155 countries have passed laws on domestic violence and 150 have passed laws. But I think even when these laws exist, they're not necessarily implemented. The only thing that is going to ensure the implementation of any legislation is the strength of the women's movement and the labour movement in fighting for them. Just another horrifying statistic, 15 million adolescent girls worldwide aged between 15 and 19 have experienced forced sex. In the vast majority of countries, adolescent girls are most at risk of forced sexual intercourse or by a current, former husband, partner, boyfriend, and so on. I mean, I could go on, but I think I probably won't, because the question that we need to ask ourselves is why. This is a horror story. It is, we've heard about Turkey, and I'm not going to, I couldn't possibly repeat what Selma has said or even add to it. But I just wanted to make the point that this is, it might take its very extreme form in Turkey and in Kurdistan and actually in some other countries I could name. But this is a worldwide problem. Interestingly, the World Health Organization says, I'm going to quote this because I can't believe that such a fairly moderate body actually said something quite useful. It said, well, that's being patronizing and horrible, but anyway, they've said this. The abuse of women, this is the World Health Organization, the abuse of women is effectively condoned in every society of the world. Prosecution and conviction of men who beat or rape women is rare. Violence operates as a means to maintain and reinforce women's subordination. Well, that is actually dead true. The question is why. That's what I want to look a little bit further. Women's oppression exists in all patriarchal class societies. If people have read Engels' Origin of Family, Private Property and the State, he was one of the first men to write about this, and the second man to write about this, well, actually the third, because, well, never mind about who the very first was. But the second one was Abdullah Öcalan in his book, Liberating Life, Women's Revolution, in which he defines patriarchy in the same way as Engels does, patriarchy as existing as the overthrow of mother right and the world historic defeat of the female sex. Öcalan says that patriarchy is counter-revolution. Now, we have to salute both the Turkish and the Kurdish women's movement, and the Kurdish women's movement has certainly been inspired by some of Abdullah Öcalan's writings. Women in Rojava, ISIS's former caliphate, women were kept as sex slaves and treated as subhuman. Those women are currently represented in every aspect of society, from the military to local communal assemblies that direct a lot of life in the territories, where every meeting is co-chaired by a woman. Women in positions of power are elected by their female peers so as not to create puppet leaders for men, and they wield considerable influence in politics. In other words, there is a bit of a unity of theory and practice going on in some of those regions of northeast Syria, which of course Turkey is anxious to smash to smithereens, as is most of their Western allies, including the United States of America. Under whatever president, I'm sure that will be the case. So Kurdish, I particularly want to mention this because it explains what the converse is. Not only have Kurdish female fighters physically fought and died to defeat terrorist groups militarily, they're also working to become an ideological antidote to ISIS. And this is where we do need to think about ideology. This is what we're coming up against. We say patriarchy. Patriarchy is an ideology. What we're fighting against and what is besetting our movement and the whole of society is the ideology of sexism and misogyny, deep-seated misogyny. And ideology, and I'm going to quote Marx, and I don't mind, I'm not at all ashamed of doing this, but what Marx said was that the ruling ideas in any society are those of the ruling class. Well, what does our ruling class need? What does the Turkish ruling class need? What does the ruling class of all capitalist society need? They need to divide. What is the most easy way of dividing people? It's on the basis of their most observable physical characteristics, their biological sex and the colour of their skin. We're only going to talk about the biological sex. Women are oppressed in all forms of class society, in all Western societies, certainly all Eastern societies and worldwide. And women, because they are oppressed, are doubly exploited. Why do women get lower pay, get lower wages than men? Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Why? Because employers can exploit the contradiction that women face between their role in domestic production, i.e. in the family, and their role in the public sphere of social production. So production, reproduction. And this is where the issue comes in, which Erdogan is so keen to parrot, but he's not the only one, the notion of family values and the family. The role of the family is central to this, even if it's a mythical family with a mythical male breadwinner. The notion is, and this is what Engels and Dr. Lamb both pointed out, that within the family, the wife, the husband is the bourgeois, the wife is the proletarian. In other words, the man is the boss and the woman is the slave. And in fact, I think Dr. Lamb talked about women's enslavement in the family. And the fact that somebody like Erdogan explicitly, they all really think it, talks about rape is okay because when all of these things are okay and we'll come out of the Istanbul Convention, because what we really have to do is to preserve family values. That phrase is used time and time again. Family values is basically a shorthand term for perpetuating women's oppression and perpetuating patriarchy and misogyny. And the fact is that within Turkey, the very example of what I quoted before about the attempt by women in some of those former ISIS caliphates to actually govern themselves and have a real form of equality is the utmost threat to the status quo that exists in all forms of class society. The notion that somehow there could be complete women's equality. What are we saying about equality? Equality to what and equality for whom? I don't think it actually can exist without a change in capitalist society. But the fact is that capitalism actually depends on this division, this deep-seated division, which is perpetuated by the ideology of sexism and misogyny. Patriarchy exists. Patriarchy is part of the DNA of all the societies in which we live. It's expressed in its most obvious and brutal form in societies which don't even pretend to be democratic. I don't think there's a proper democracy anywhere. So I don't want to laud bourgeois democracy and say this society's got it better. We have to show solidarity with our sisters in Poland, for example, who are fighting against the most appalling withdrawal of their rights to abortion. But much more, by the way, Poland has withdrawn from the Istanbul Convention. We're talking about societies which are of the most appalling populist nationalist kind. And we have to show solidarity with our sisters who are fighting against the most extreme forms of patriarchal oppression. But we don't do that because we feel sorry for them. We don't do that because we think they're victims. We do that because we as women have to show solidarity with all women fighting a common enemy, which is this oppressive ideology, this oppressive patriarchy, this oppressive society, which lauds a mythical notion of family values. And by the way, when you think about one in, I can't remember what the statistic is, but how many families end in divorce, you know, there is no, the monogamous nuclear family is an ideal type, which actually is finding it very, very difficult to exist. Nevertheless, that ideology is the ideology that's perpetuated because it suits those who seek to divide us. I think the ideology of sexism and misogyny is so deeply rooted. And for example, in the 19th century, in this country, wife sales were the norm. I mean, there were novels written about it by Thomas Hardy.
Indeed, yeah.
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you only have to look at other countries. Horror at Saudi Arabia, women not even being allowed to drive, all of these things, they're comparatively recent and they're current things. So they're deeply, deeply rooted historically. You know, right from feudal society through well, from slave society, feudal society, capitalist society, it's there. So to root out this ideology, we have to recognize that it has, and I think Selma, if I understood her correctly, said this, it's so deeply rooted that it does penetrate our very own labor movement. Our very own labor movement, which we cherish, adore, and are active in, also needs to learn a few lessons from women, because women have been prevented from playing a full part in our movement for an awful long time. And unfortunately, the kind of ideology that insists that the cuts and all sorts of forms of austerity have to be faced first of all by women means that even within our own movement, we see the closing down of some of our women-only committees, conferences, and so on. We have to fight to overcome that, because basically what we have to fight to overcome is the notion of women's subservience and second-class status, wherever it exists in whatever society. So I think I'll have to draw my marks to a close, but just to say that women's solidarity worldwide against oppression is, I think, the key turning point for society. If we're interested in building a different society, and I certainly am interested in having building a socialist society, this cannot ever be achieved without the full participation of half the human race being women. So women, we need to be strong, we need to dare to struggle, and we need to dare to win, and hopefully we will.
Mary, thank you very much. I mean, as we sometimes say in the trade union movement, they don't call it the struggle for nothing, because, you know, when it comes to women's rights, women's presence, women's, you know, capacity to be involved in everything, you know, we do see it in our own movement. So, you know, whether we're looking very close to home in our own movement, or whether we're looking, you know, globally at the statistics, there is a very great deal of work to do. Now, I've just picked up that there are a couple of questions in the chat. So if you and Pat, Mary, would just like to have a little think about this, because they are, although they are specific to, in one case to the Turkish Kurdish situation, they also have a more general application. So the first question is a question about the deployment of sexual violence in war and conflict. Now, of course, we know that has happened a great deal, in particular to Kurdish women and other minorities in Turkey. But it is a general issue, the deployment of sexual violence as a weapon of war. And I think it's interesting to contemplate the fact that, yes, it's sexual violence, but it's actually a crime of power, isn't it? That's what it is. It's a crime of power. So if you just have some thoughts about that one. And the second question that people are that someone has asked is, you know, picking up on what both Pat and what Mary have said, how can we think about what the best practice is in trying to move forward these issues on which we're struggling? Can we think of some examples of what we would really like to see happening? So, Pat, I don't know if you want to have a go at either of those two questions. I'd be delighted to hear from you.
Hi, yeah, and you're quite right. It doesn't matter where you look in history, women have always been used as you know, a sexual weapon in war, haven't they? They've always been that thing at the forefront. But it's not about, as you say, I don't think it's about the actual sexual act. It's about the power that they actually hold over us. And rightly so, as Mary just said there herself, when she was talking about us and women and that, you know, we're 51% of the population worldwide. And yet we don't have that voice and that there. And I think from a point of view that I would like to say is that women in their own right go out, and we've moved on so much in the roles that we play in society today, you know, and joining the armed forces was one of those. But sadly to say, I think, and I'm going to revert back to obviously in our own UK, I can revert back to quite a lot of time. We haven't got it right in England yet properly neither. If you look at some of the statistics and you speak to some people that have left, women that have left the British Army, is actually that. And I was married to somebody in the forces, as I said earlier on. And even being married to one in the forces, I was told, think yourself lucky, you're the bag and baggage. But the words, and I'll always stay with me, is the words that I heard referring to the female soldiers that we had. And is that they were squaddies, ground sheets. That's how they used to refer to them, as squaddies, ground sheets. So even, you know, we talk about in the war thing, still we have that in these huge male institutions, because that's what the British Army is. It's a male institution, and women still aren't in that place. And for the Kurdistani women and that, as I've said, I've looked at that question. I've just Googled a little bit there. It's something I would like to know a little bit more about, because it's something that I don't really know a lot about. As I'm saying, I'm new to an international platform to bring this. So that's what my input would be at this moment.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Pat. There's a very great deal written about Kurdish women in particular, and I'm sure you'll enjoy reading about it. So, Mary, let's come to you on those questions.
Well, rape as a weapon of war is, it goes back centuries and centuries. And why is rape a weapon of war? I think we can work it out. I mean, it is a fact, and we can only dissemble it and analyze it if we put it in the context of what we understand about patriarchal ideology, misogyny, sexism, and all the things that we've been talking about. And it will continue to be a weapon of war until we have a different sort of society. So this question about where do we go, well, it wasn't where do we go from here, but what are the positives? We've got policies coming out of our ear holes, frankly, on every aspect of women's oppression, sexual, whatever, you name it, there's a policy, we've got a policy. The question is, how do we operationalize these policies? And my answer, it's not an answer really, it's just a statement to say that without a strong movement, without a strong women's movement, which we need to build in this country, we will not get very far. And that's the problem. It's if we lay down our placards, our voices and our banners, nobody's going to do it for us. However, having said that, a women's movement allied to a labour movement, which is learning something from the women's movement, is the key thing. Because if we really want to change society, it's not going to be us on our own. We've got to be there as the shock troops to fight against this oppressive ideology in the same way that black people have to fight against racism. But again, unless these things are taken on board in what you might call the mainstream movement, we are just going to be talking to ourselves. But if we want change, then coming back to the policies we've got coming out of our ear holes, first of all, we've got to be organised. We have to have a movement. It's no good relying on Parliament. Even if we had the most progressive Labour government in the world, which we might have done, we haven't actually, since it's only a year since we've known that for sure. That on its own would not lead to the changes that we want, because the ruling class is pretty clever, and without an extra parliamentary movement, i.e. a movement of workers, women allied together, then we're not going to be able to not just achieve any gains, but sustain them. And I just think back to our own history, and I'm sure it's true of the history of every country, when the movement is strong, then we do see some changes. And I'm probably older than anybody here, but I can remember 1974. I can remember the fact that we had such a mass movement then, which was organised against the Tory government's Industrial Relations Act. We had 2 minor strikes. I'm not talking about the big one in 1984, but 74. And that movement brought down the Tory government. The Heath government was brought down by the strength of the mass movement outside Parliament. So I know that's very British centric to say this, but it's true. It's a truism for everywhere that change can only be won through struggle. And for women, we've got to organise, but we've also got to organise the men to be our auxiliaries. It's enough time has passed when we're the auxiliaries for the men's movement. We've got to turn that around. But we've got to build, and we've got to build. It's got to be sisterhood, socialism, and struggle.
Sisterhood, socialism, and struggle. I like that, Mary. That's great. I mean, I think we haven't got we've got a number of observations and comments in the chat, but no other actual, I think, specific questions. So given that you've given us such great input this evening, I think I'm going to begin to wrap this up now. But I'm going to wrap it up by saying that, you know, it's not as though we haven't made any advances. We have made some advances. And even Selma was saying, you know, obviously through the organization of women and through the trade unions in Turkey, Kurdish women and other women, as well as Turkish women, gains have been made. And one of the things that it's absolutely incumbent upon those of us who've been around for a long time, and I can remember 1974, Mary, I'd been teaching for a year by then. Anyway, those of us who've been around for a long time, we have to absolutely make sure that those stories and the history of what women have gained are in the forefront of women's minds and young men's minds now. Because, you know, things in some respects, particularly in Britain, but also for some women globally, are a bit better. But that is very fragile. You know, we have to struggle for it all the time. Not a day goes by when I don't think, you know, things could be better for women, but we have to do something about it to make it better for women. So I'm just going to thank you to our speakers who are still with us. On behalf of the audience that we've had, people were saying that they'd come in from various places, including the north of Ireland. Thank you very much to you two for being with us. Thank you very much, obviously, to Selma, although she's now left us, but we're pleased that she joined us. And obviously, thank you very much to Osman and Chana, who did the translation for us, without which we wouldn't have been able to have Selma's participation. So thank you very much.